What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Emerald Crusader live stream. I am Emerald. I hope everyone had a fantastic Sunday. I know I did. I did something I haven't done in a very long time. I had myself an Epsom salt bath, and that was very nice. Feel nice and rested and rejuvenated and clean. But that was yesterday. Sunday's over. It's Monday, and if you're new to the stream, Monday means it's time for another installment of Music Monday. As you can probably tell by the multitude of instruments I have around me, music is very important to me. So I like to jump on stream once a week and talk about Music Monday. So I have a couple of segments lined up for us. The first segment is suggested suggestions. So one of my favorite pastimes is compiling my suggestions playlist that I have on my iTunes. And this playlist is just every artist that gets thrown at me, whether it's someone that I find in my YouTube feed or Apple Music suggested it to me, or just randomly talking to someone at a bar tells me about a song, although that hasn't happened in a while. But still, any way I can get my hands on music, I throw it onto that suggestions playlist. And then I put that playlist on shuffle and kick back and let whatever plays play. And as I listen to that playlist, I take some of the gems and throw them into my regular rotation, and the cream of that crop I bring to you guys as my suggested suggestions. And that suggestion today is a band called Thank You Scientists. So Thank You Scientists was formed at the New Jersey Montclair State University music program when their guitar player, their saxophone player, and their trumpet player met. Their musical tastes with Frank Zappa, Harry Nilsson, and the Beatles, along with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, would later become an influence and seed the band Thank You Scientist. In 2009, vocalists for the band, and also their bass player and their drummer, and as well as a violin player, these guys have a heck of a lineup, joined the band, which became the original lineup for Thank You Scientists. The band self-released their The Pearls of Time Travel EP in 2011, followed shortly after by their first full-length album release, Maps of Non-Existent Places, in 2012. Both of those are my two personal favorites. The album caught the attention of Claudio Sanchez, vocalist and guitarist for the progressive rock metal band Coheed and Cambria, and he's also the founder of Evil Inc. Records, who signed Thank You Scientists, and they were actually the first band that the label ever signed back in summer of 2014. They went on to release a music video, and then the deal opened up a multitude of doors for the band, which soon started touring with Periphery and Coheed and Cambria. And then once they started touring, the bass player left the band and was temporarily replaced, and then later replaced again. And then touring also put new pressures on some of the other bandmates, like the guitarist, the saxophone player, and the trumpet player also left the band. So after that, they released their song Psyopomp, which included a blue coat drums and bugle corps showing jagline. They announced their next album, Terraformer, in April of 2019 and released their first single off of that album, Fox Mulder, after the X-Files series, of course. And then on April 13th, the album was released, that's when the single was released, and then the album was released on June 14th of 2009. The band also released a video for Fox Mulder made with solar equipment and in conjunction with Blue Coat's drum and bugle corps. So, again, I recommend their first 2 albums, but the other albums, it's not that it's bad or anything, it's still really quality music, it's just differently, so subjectively I prefer their earlier work. But, I mean, talk about prog rock, there's elements of jazz, funk, just all kinds of stuff just rolled into some really well put together rock arrangements. I highly recommend putting these guys into your regular rotation this week. And yeah, let me know what you think of them down in the comments. Anyway, let's move on to the next segment I have planned for us today, which is interesting instruments. There are hundreds of weird instruments in the world, so I like to go find some and tell you about them. This weird instrument comes from a band called Electronicos Fantasticos, and they are a highly inventive band referred to as making multimedia EDM music. Each of the band's instruments is made from recycled electronics, including their incredible electric fan harp and their electric fan bass. So this thing is awesome. As soon as I saw it, I couldn't take my eyes off of it because it's so amazingly inventive and it sounds so cool. The way it works is they attached a disc to the rotor of the fan, and as you can see in each of those pictures, they're holding a light onto that fan, and in the disc there's holes drilled, and at each length in the disc, throughout the radius of the disc, there's holes drilled in different patterns, so they produce a different sound as light passes through them. And then that sound is interpreted by a bass amp. And then also at the top of the amp, if you look at the right picture, at the top of the instrument, they have a switch and a couple of different triggers up there, so they're able to further affect and control the noise being generated by the pattern of light blinking through the fan. It's so cool. Let's give this baby a listen real quick. So cool, right? Just it just sounds so awesome coming through the bass amp, and also he's very creative with the rhythms going on with the switch, and it's just a phenomenal instrument. And again, that's the band Electronicos Fantasticos. They have a YouTube page, and all of their instruments are made of recycled electronics, so they're just as inventive and creative and cool and interesting sounding as this fan. So I highly recommend going and checking them out. And speaking of highly inventive things, much unlike my segues, let's move on to the next segment, where this segment's called Center Stage. And usually I talk about an artist or a group or something like that. But today I want to talk about a genre that I feel is extremely overlooked and underappreciated in music today. And that is rock progressivo italiano, also referred to as RPI. Translated, it is Italian progressive rock. And so, to just wet your whistle a little bit, this quote from Scott B. Montgomery, who's the associate professor of art history at the University of Denver, best sums up, in my opinion, what RPI is. And so he says, progressive rock was Italy's manifestation of psychedelic music, the product of a meeting of conservatory trained musicians and counterculture interests. Progressive rock constituted much of the soundtrack of Italy's own psychedelic renaissance, as expressed in rock festivals and youth activism. More grounded in classical and Italian song traditions than in blues, this music represented Italy's psychedelicizing of its own heritage. It was another mode of psychedelic rock, more cerebral and formal than the unbridled and improvisational. Understanding progressive rock in Italy's psychedelic music acknowledges the existence of different versions of psychedelia around the world and raises the idea of indigenous psychedelias. So, one, I think that is really a good description of RPI because it distinguishes that it is fundamentally tied to the Italian culture, specifically the era of the time. And also, it is, unlike a lot of prog rock music, it's less based on rock, because most prog rock is kind of fundamentally built on rock and roll and metal and that kind of stuff, and then they add influences from other genres into it. These guys, generally speaking, went in a different direction with that and built more off of classical than they did rock and roll, and they added heavy elements of rock and roll into their music. So that's a little bit of a distinguishing factor, at least in my opinion. Something else to say about RPI before we get ahead of ourselves into this is that it's not going to be for everyone. Obviously, if you don't like lyrics of foreign languages that you don't understand in your music, and you also don't speak Italian, then you're probably not going to enjoy this genre. However, if you like instrumentals like I do, you might find that not understanding the words kind of adds to the composition, and it makes it so where the lead singer's voice isn't really someone who's talking to you, more as it's just another instrument in the composition. And especially with Italian, to me, the Italian language is extremely musical. I mean, I love listening to Italian opera. So I feel that especially the Italian language, being the language sung as an instrument, really plays into the character of RPI. So, that being said, also, if you're into British and American prog bands like Genesis or Yes or Rush or Pink Floyd or even someone like Mars Volta, you might want to stick around and check out some of these bands, because some of those bands were heavy influences of these guys, but also some of these bands were very, very close to being Italian clones of these guys. So that is RPI in a nutshell. I mean, I kind of came across it randomly. One day my friend and I were going through a YouTube feed just watching random avant-garde music, and we came across this genre, specifically Cervello's Melos album, and I think that when I found that, it was very crucial to my palate's development as far as music goes. It kind of made me rethink what could be done musically outside of conventional thinking. So, although there is a lot of RPI music coming out of Italy today, when I'm talking about RPI, I'm more referring to the early pioneers and the golden years of the genre back in the 70s. But before we talk about the 70s, let's build a little bit of backstory for the RPI movement. So back in the 60s, while rock was gaining a ton of popularity, the United States and the United Kingdom were often considered to be on the forefront of these genres. Italy, at the time, was considered to be behind trends set by these nations, as they would often mimic them when it came to things like music and fashion, especially around the pop scene. As a result, Italian pop rock from the 60s was considered somewhat as a cheap imitation of what groups in other nations were doing. Because of this, and the association with the region, prog rock came out of the area in the following decade with not much notice outside of Italy itself, at least at the time. And it still remains a pretty niche subgenre today. Most would consider the true birth of the progressive rock movement in the UK. With them birthing the genre, however, a lot of focus was put on the British and the American prog groups. And while these groups were certainly talented and revolutionary in their own right, 100%, the general focus driving the writing was often pure musical ambition. Very much so like Jaco Pastorius from my first center stage in Music Monday 1. It's pure musical ambition driving them. But in the Italian prog rock scene, it was a little bit of a different story. Because of the political climate in Italy, young artists sought out new ways to express themselves, both emotionally and politically. Ranging from classically trained musicians to local songwriters, this movement gripped the nation in a matter of years. And that was because young people were restless, as many people entering their 20s and 30s at the time were not only struggling emotionally with World War II and the possible role their parents and many people that they respected, or possibly still respect, may have played in the rise of fascism in Europe. Most musicians at the time, at least the ones involved in this genre, had more or less of a strong left-wing leaning. So, with a desire to disrupt the conservative culture of the era, they saw no better place to start than the storied tradition of beloved Italian music. Without a strong rock tradition, in the 60s in Italy, they had maintained basically just producing beat bands of varying quality, but as the tidal wave of the counterculture swept in, it brought revolution not only in the form of progressive rock, but also differing forms of heavier continental rock, which was establishing itself around the same time. So it was a little bit more than just musical ambition driving it. It was more of a statement. It was more of them taking classical music, something that was viewed as traditional and conservative, and they were adding all of these elements to it, in some people's opinion, improving upon it, and then flying the better version in the face of the traditional. So it was just as much a political statement as it was a music movement. And so with psychedelic infused music and the incorporation of classical music may have been the same stepping stone most of the other prog bands at the time were using. At this embryonic stage, there was a bit of a difference between the Italian prog rock and prog rock coming from other nations. In the late 60s, when the beat scene was already heading towards a decline, a number of bands formed that bridged the gap between beat, conventional Italian easy listening music, and the new ideas coming from the prog rock scenes in Great Britain and in America. So, let's talk about the bands that kind of bridged that gap and birthed RPI. So, these bands are kind of considered proto-Italian prog. I'm not going to try and pronounce their names because I'm going to butcher that absolutely, as I don't natively speak Italian, nor have I ever learned any. So, the first band we want to talk about is a band called PFM. I'm not even pronouncing it, and I still butchered saying the name. PFM. Wow. It's probably the best known in the US of the Italian prog rock genre, as it had a wide release both in the United States and in the UK. Very much akin to the prog stylings of the United States and the UK, they're often compared to early King Crimson and Genesis. So we're seeing an incorporation of prog rock into some of the traditional music, but it's still very much so in the vein of the prog counterparts of the time. And then we get to a band referred to as BMS, because I am going to butcher trying to pronounce that. But this is the band that most Italians lean towards when asked about the essential premier Italian prog bands. Driven by two keyboardists who are actually brothers, their sound is closer to an Italian ELP, and if you don't know who ELP is, please go look them up. But with the powerful vocalist coming in with his Italian vocals, it had a bit more of a classical opera vibe to it. Their first US and UK release, the fourth LP entitled simply Bonco, is the best place to start for newcomers, but their first four are also absolutely essential listening. Their debut album is thought of by many Italians as the best release in all of Italian prog. Let me know whether or not you agree with that. They, although, like PFM, were still closely resembling their American counterparts. When we really start to get into what's considered Italian prog, we have to talk about this band, which I think I can pronounce this. Leorme, one of those, who were one of the first bands to successfully transition from the psychedelic rock vibes to the prog rock, when they ditched their psychedelic 60s era rock sound for a heavily influenced sound of ELP and The Nice in 1971, and they released what many consider as the first example of genuine Italian prog, this album here, Collage. They released several other albums. Their album released in 1973 was picked up by Prisma Records in the UK, and they issued this album with an English version written by Peter Hamill, and this was one of the top albums of the Italian prog ever. So they gained huge notoriety and international publicity because of that big release, but they were widely unknown until that big release, except for in Italy specifically. So those three guys kind of brought RPI from its embryonic stage to its fully grown and developed stage around 71. So let's talk about the golden years of Italian progressive rock. The beginning of the new decade saw the rise of countless numbers of bands and artists some of whom would go on to become successful acts. The prog rock bug became so widespread in Italy that some experts say every artist and band in Italy produced at least one progressive album during this time. Every single band, at least one prog rock album. That's so much freaking music coming out of this decade from this region. During the peak years of the RPI movement, the do a flip. I can't do a flip. I can try and find a coin and flip that. How you doing, man? Or woman, or however you identify. Oh no, you're all good. Here to chat with people. Sorry, but where was I? Let's see. Fans witnessed the rise of fans witnessed bands rise to from obscurity to compete on the same stage as large music acts in these Italian festivals that they would throw that were usually free of charge and boasted a large level of artistic freedom that was very seldomly found in pop music at the time. So this musical competition also created something of an upward spiral, and everyone tried to outdo each other, producing unique sounds and incorporating different influences into their music. The variety of music went through the roof, with every band sharing the same aspirations, but each one kind of having a different sound. The upward spiral also meant an oversaturated market, however, in which many bands only managed to put out one or two releases with minimal budget and intense recordings. Some of the... Oh, hey! Thanks for the follow. I appreciate it. Some of the best, most genuine and treasured albums of the RPI movement can be found in this group of just one and done albums from these bands. The first one that I found that I mentioned, Saravella, or Sir, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but they're one of those guys that just had one album and then the band fell apart. After its explosive development in the early 70s, the movement followed the same path as other progressive musical movements in the world as it approached the 80s. Some influential artists continued to release new albums, though never with the same success as before, and others changed with the times and became highly successful mainstream artists both in Italy and internationally. The quality of music coming from the late 70s, early 80s RPI is still just as good. However, it's more melodic and less brash and avant-garde than the classical period, but these are still respectable releases and still just as good to listen to. With that said, the first album that I dropped in there, both of those albums in the chat, I heavily borrowed from for the information in this presentation. So if you are interested in this and want to learn a ton more about it, check out those articles. But also in the first link there, towards the bottom of that article, he lists an album of 100 essential RPI albums, and I had heard of like maybe half a dozen of those albums, but I had not heard of a large portion, and all of those albums are already on my suggestions playlist. Yeah, absolutely, I can send them again for sure. So this is the one where it has the suggested list down at the bottom of it. And then this one here just has a ton of other information as well as band names that I did not include in my notes because I cannot pronounce them whatsoever. They're phenomenal bands, but I'm not gonna disrespect them by butchering their names. But yeah, so after the golden years, as recently as the 90s and early 2000s, RPI again proved its longevity in the prog community. Scores of the classic albums were repressed in Japan, then specialized independent labels started to re-release many of the classic albums. Consequently, RPI has not only reached new generations of fans, but the increased interest and appreciation have led to new material being released. Artists whose recordings have never been in circulation, bands that are now new to our ears as they are to many of them who were listening to them at the time, now have a newfound audience, creating kind of like oh, awesome, yes, please go listen to it. I want everyone to know about this genre because it is phenomenal. It is one of the best genres out there. But yeah, this kind of created a whole wormhole effect to where you had this brand new music coming from the 1970s era Italy. And so with the revival clearly underway, the 90s produced some stellar Italian albums and the beginning of the CD reissue fever. In the 2000s, the trend had continued to much more successful degree. RPI is back and fan interest has exploded to both the classical period and the new bands of today, like the bands on screen that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I can't. I don't speak Italian, so I'm not even going to try and approach those pronunciations. But Italian progressive rock today covers a wide range of styles and influences, but many of the bands, especially those on screen, ground a portion of their sound in the RPI tradition. Moreover, this first decade of the 21st century has seen a new round of publications, both in print and in electronic form, covering various aspects of Italian prog, as well as the creation of a number of excellent websites dedicated to the subgenre, which is extremely influential as it regards to the promotion of new bands and artists in the genre. And commercial success with RPI has always been modest at best compared to big band releases in other countries. However, the quality of music, past and present, from its unique composition to fiercely independent spirit, has earned RPI subgenre some of prog's most loyal followers, this guy included. So that's Rocco Progressivo Italiano, and that's the most Italian I'm gonna try and pronounce because I'm pretty sure I messed that up. So that leaves our last segment for the evening, music moment. Before I jump to that, I want to say thank you for joining the stream. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, I will be back next Monday for another Music Monday. And if you really like the stream, thank you so much. If you have any suggestions or anything like that, I post this video to my YouTube page right after I get done streaming. So you can either post in the comments here or post in the comments there. If you have any suggestions or any segment ideas, any bands you'd like me to talk about, anything like that, let me know. And also, if you really did enjoy this, I also stream 4 other days a week, having different themes for each of the days. So I'll be back on Wednesday with Willpower Wednesday, which is just a short story about someone who has a tremendous amount of, or does an amazing feat of will, hopefully to inspire myself and others to have more willpower. Then we do Thoughtful Thursday, which is in the same vein as willpower, but to get you to think. So I do a bio about a really smart person. Then I talk about some amazing technology that might change the world. And then what else do I do on Thoughtful Thursday? I do something else. It's very thoughtful. Obviously, I need it more. And then on Fridays, I do Chai Fridays, which is where I host my Chai Am I Reading This Book Club. This coming Friday, we are going through part 2 of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. So if you enjoy that book, or if you haven't picked it up in a while, or if you want to check it out, I am a very slow reader as I am dyslexic. So this book club caters to people that either read slowly or don't have a ton of time to read but a few chapters a week. So if you want to catch up to me to get to part 2 of Salem's Lot, by next Friday. Come join me and we'll talk about it, but there will be spoilers, so if you haven't finished part 2, I wouldn't suggest coming to that. And then on Saturdays, I do Weekend Deep End, which is where I just do a deep dive into whatever random subject. Sometimes I have one of my friends join me. Weekend Deep End, I find random things on the internet that I get interested in, and then I do a bunch of research and tell you guys about it. So if you enjoyed that, oh yeah, please. And again, I have a YouTube channel that's under the same name. I post all the videos here after I get done streaming, and I also post the videos there. So whichever one's more convenient for you, feel free to check them out. And even though you won't be present in the comment or in the chat for me to engage with immediately, I will absolutely reply to any comments on the videos. So please watch any way you can. And thanks again for joining. I'm gonna check out of here, and I will be back next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for Willpower Wednesday. Thanks again. Bye.